This is Louis Tracy's The Silent Barrier, a work now in the public domain. Chapter 9. E.T.T.'s father. Though the hut was a crude thing, a triumph of essentials over luxuries, Helen had never before hailed 4 walls and a roof with such heartfelt, if silent, thanksgiving. She sank exhausted on a rough bench and watched the matter of fat Engadiners unpacking the stores and firewood carried in their rucksacks. Their businesslike air supplied the tonic she needed. Though the howling storm seemed to threaten the tiny refuge with destruction, these 2 men set to work, coolly and methodically, to prepare a meal. Barth arranged the contents of Carl's bulky package on a small table, and the porter busied himself with lighting a fire in a Swiss stove that stood in the centre of the outer room. An inner apartment loomed black and uninviting through an open doorway. Helen discovered later that some scanty accommodation was provided there for those who meant to sleep in the hut in readiness for an early ascent, while it supplied a separate room in the event of women taking part in an expedition. Bauer offered her a quantity of brandy and water. She declined it, declaring that she needed only time to regain her breath. He was a man who might be trusted not to pester anyone with well-meant but useless attentions. He went to the door, lit a cigarette, and seemed to be keenly interested in the sleet as it pelted the moraine or gathered in drifts in the minor fissures of the glacier. Within a remarkably short space of time, Carl had concocted 2 cups of steaming coffee. Helen was then all aglow. Her strength was restored. The boisterous wind had crimsoned her cheeks beneath the tan. She had never looked such a picture of radiant womanhood as after this tussle with the storm. Luckily, her clothing was not wet, since the travellers reached the cabane at the very instant the elements became really aggressive. It was a quite composed and reinvigorated Helen who summoned Bauer from his contemplation of the weather portents. "We may be besieged," she cried, "but at any rate we are not on famine rations. What a spread! You could hardly have brought more food if you fancied we might be kept here a week." The sustained physical effort called for during the last part of the climb seemed to have dispelled his fit of abstraction. Being an eminently adaptable man, he responded to her mood. "Ah, that sounds more like the enthusiast who set forth so gaily from the Cursail this morning," he answered, pulling the door ajar before he took a seat by her side on the bench. "A few minutes ago you were ready to condemn me as several kinds of idiot for going on in the teeth of our Switzer's warnings. Now, confess." "I don't think I could have climbed another 10 yards, she admitted. "Our haste was due to Barth's anxiety. He wanted to save you from a drenching. It was a near thing, and with the thermometer falling a degree a minute soaked garments might have brought very unpleasant consequences. But that was our only risk. Old mountaineer as I am, I hardly expected such a blizzard in August, after such short notice too. Otherwise, now that we are safely housed, you are fortunate in securing a memorable experience. The storm will soon blow over, but it promises to be lively while it lasts." Helen was sipping her coffee. Perhaps her eyes conveyed the question, her tongue hesitated to utter. Bauer smiled pleasantly, and gesticulated with hands and shoulders in a way that was foreign to his studiously cultivated English habit of repose. Indeed, with his climber's garb he seemed to have acquired a new manner. There was a perplexing change in him since the morning. "Yes," he said, "I understand perfectly. You and I might sing Lieder ohne Wörter, Miss Winton. I have known these summer gales to last 4 days, but pray do not be alarmed," for Helen nearly dropped her cup in quick dismay. "My own opinion is that we shall have a delightful afternoon. Of course, I am a discredited prophet. Ask Barth." The guide, hearing his name mentioned, glanced at them, though he was engaged at the moment in taking the wrappings off a quantity of bread, cold chicken, and slices of ham and beef. He agreed with Bauer. The barometer stood high when they left the hotel. He thought, as all men think who live in the open, that the sharper the blast, the sooner it's past. "Moreover," broke in Carl, who refused to be left out of the conversation, "Johann Clucker's cat was sitting with its back to the stove last evening." This bit of homely philosophy brought a ripple of laughter from Helen, whereupon Carl explained. "Cats are very wise, Fräulein. Johann Clucker's cat is old. Therefore she is skilled in reading the tokens of the weather. A cat hates wind and rain and makes her arrangements accordingly. If she washes herself smoothly, the next 12 hours will be fine. If she licks against the grain, it will be wet. When she lies with her back to the fire, there will surely be a squall. When her tail is up and her coat rises, look out for wind." "Johann Clucker's cat has settled the dispute," said Bauer gravely in English. "A squall it is, a most suitable prediction for a cat, and I am once more rehabilitated in your esteem, I hope." A cold iridescence suddenly illumined the gloomy interior of the hut. It gave individuality to each particle of sleet whirling past the door. Helen thought that the sun had broken through the storm clouds for an instant, but Bauer said quietly, "Are you afraid of lightning? Not very. I don't like it. Some people collapse altogether when they see it." "Perhaps when forewarned you are forearmed." A low rumble boomed up the valley, and the mountain echoes muttered in solemn chorus. "We are to be spared none of the scenic accessories, then," said Helen. "None. In fact, you will soon see and hear a thunderstorm that would have delighted Gust of Daw. Please remember that it cannot last long, and that this hut has been built 20 years to my knowledge." Helen sipped her coffee, but pushed away a plate set before her by Bath. "If you don't mind, I should like the door wide open," she said. "You prefer to lunch later?" "Yes." "And you wish to face the music, is that it?" "I think so. Let me remind you that Jove's thunderbolts are really forged on the hilltops. I am here, so I must make the best of it. I shall not scream or faint, if that is what you dread." "I dread nothing but your anger for not having turned back when a retreat was possible." "I hate turning back, Miss Winton. I have never yet withdrawn from any enterprise seriously undertaken, and I was determined to share your first ramble among my beloved hills." Another gleam of light, bluer and more penetrating than its forerunner, lit the brown rafters of the cabane. It was succeeded by a crash like the roar of massed artillery. The walls trembled. Some particles of mortar rattled noisily to the floor. A strange sound of rending, followed by a heavy thud, suggested something more tangible than thunderbolts. Howard kicked the door and it swung inward. "An avalanche," he said. "Probably a rockfall, too. Of course, the hut stands clear of the track of unpleasant visitors of that description." Helen had not expected this courageous bearing in a man of Bauer's physical characteristics. Hitherto she had regarded him as somewhat self-indulgent, a sybarite, the product of modernity in its London aspects. His demeanour in the train, in the hotel, bespoke one accustomed to gratify the flesh, who found all the world ready to pander to his desires. Again she was conscious of that instinctive trustfulness a woman freely reposes in a dominant man. Oddly enough, she thought of Spencer in the same breath. An hour earlier, had she been asked which of these two would command her confidence during a storm, her unhesitating choice would have favoured the American. Now, she was at least sure that Bauer's coolness was not assumed. His attitude inspired emulation. She rose and went to the door. "I want to see an avalanche," she cried. "Where did that one fall?" Bauer followed her. He spoke over her shoulder. "On Monte Roseg, I expect. The weather seems to be clearing slightly. This tearing wind will soon roll up the mist, and the thunder will certainly start another big rock or a snowslide. If you are lucky, you may witness something really fine." A dazzling flash leaped over the glacier. Although the surrounding peaks were as yet invisible through the haze of sleet and vapour, objects near at hand were revealed with uncanny distinctness. Each frozen wave on the surface of the ice was etched in sharp lines. A cluster of seracs on a neighbouring icefall showed all their mad chaos. The blue-green chasm of a huge crevasse was illumined to a depth far below any point to which the rays of the sun penetrated. On the neighbouring slope of Monte Roseg, the crimson and green and yellow mosses were given sudden life against the black background of rock. Every boulder here wore a sombre robe. They were stark and grim. The eye instantly caught the contrast to their grey-white fellows piled on the lower moraine or in the bed of the Orlegna. Helen was quick to note the new tone of black amid the vividly white patches of snow. She waited until the deafening thunder peal was dying away in eerie cadences. "Why are the rocks black here and almost white in the valley?" she asked. "Because they are young, as rocks go," was the smiling answer. "They have yet to pass through the mill. They will be battered and bruised and polished before they emerge from the glacier several years hence and a few miles nearer peace. In that they resemble men. 'Pon my word, Miss Winton, you have caused me to evolve a rather poetic explanation of certain grey hairs I have noticed of late among my own raven locks. You appear to know and love these hills so well that I wonder, if you will excuse a personal remark, I wonder you ever were able to tear yourself away from them." "I have missed too much of real enjoyment in the effort to amass riches," he said slowly. "Believe me, that thought has held me since you and I set foot on the Forno together." "But you knew? You were no stranger to the Alps?" I am beginning to understand that one cannot claim kinship with the high places until they stir the heart more in storm than in sunshine. When I saw all these giants glittering in the sun like knights in silver armor, I described them to myself as gloriously beautiful. Now I feel that they are more than that. They are awful, pitiless in their indifference to frail mortals. They carry me into a dim region where life and death are terms without meaning. Yes, that is the true spirit of the mountains. I too used to look on them with affectionate reverence, and you recall the old days. Perhaps, if I am deemed worthy, you will teach me the cult once more. He bent closer. Helen became conscious that in her enthusiasm she had spoken unguardedly. She moved away, slightly but unmistakably, a step or two out into the open, for the hut on that side was not exposed to the bitter violence of the wind. "It is absurd to imagine us in a change of role," she cried. "I should play the poorest travesty of mentor to your Telemachus. Oh, what is that?" While she was speaking, another blinding flare of lightning flooded moraine and glacier and pierced the veil of sleet. Her voice rose almost to a shriek. Bauer sprang forward. His left hand rested reassuringly across her shoulders. "Better come inside the hut," he began. "But I saw someone, a white face, staring at me down there." "It is possible. There is no cause for fear. A party may have crossed from Italy. There would be none from the Maloja at this hour." Helen was actually trembling. Bauer drew her a little nearer. He himself was unnerved, a prey to wilder emotions than she could guess, till later days brought a fuller understanding. It was a mad trick of fate that threw the girl into his embrace just then, for another far-flung sheet of fire revealed to her terrified vision the figures of Spencer and Stamper on the rocks beneath. With brutal candour, the same flash showed her nestling close to Bauer. For some reason, she shuddered. Though the merciful gloom of the next few seconds restored her faculties, her face and neck were aflame. She almost felt that she had been detected in some fault. Her confusion was not lessened by hearing a muttered curse from her companion. Careless of the stinging sleet, she leaped down to a broad tier of rock below the plateau of the hut and cried shrilly, "Is that really you, Mr. Spencer?" A more tremendous burst of thunder than any yet experienced dwarfed all other sounds for an appreciable time. The American scrambled up, almost at her feet, and stood beside her. Stamper came quick on his heels, moving with a lightness and accuracy of foothold amazing in one so lame. "Just me, Miss Winton. Sorry if I have frightened you, but our old friend here was insistent that we should hurry. I have been tracking you since 9 o'clock. Spencer's words were nonchalantly polite. He even raised his cap, though the fury of the ice-laden blast might well have excused this formal act of courtesy. Helen was still blushing so painfully that she became angry with herself, and her voice was hardly under control. Nevertheless, she managed to say, "How kind and thoughtful of you. I am all right, as you see. Mr. Bauer and the guide were able to bring me here before the storm broke. We happened to be standing near the door, watching the lightning. When I caught a glimpse of you, I was so stupidly startled that I screamed and almost fell into Mr. Bauer's arms. Put in that way, it did not sound so distressing. And Spencer had no desire to add further difficulties to a situation already awkward. "Guess you scared me too," he said. "I suppose, now we are at the hut, Stamper will not object to my waiting 5 minutes or so before we start for home. Surely you will lunch with us. Everything is set out on the table, and we have food enough for a regiment. You would need it if you remained here another couple of hours, Miss Winton. Stamper tells me that a first-rate gux, which is Swiss for a blizzard, I believe, is blowing up. This thunderstorm is the preliminary to a heavy downfall of snow. That is why I came. If we are not off the glacier before 2 o'clock, it will become impassable till a lot of the snow melts." "What is that you are saying?" demanded Bauer brusquely. Helen and the 2 men had reached the level of the cabane, but Stamper, thinking they would all enter, kept in the rear. "If that fairy tale accounts for your errand, you are on a wild goose chase, Mr. Spencer." He had not heard the American's words clearly, but he gathered sufficient to account for the younger man's motive in following them, and was furiously annoyed by this unlooked-for interruption. He had no syllable of thanks for a friendly action. Though no small risk attended the crossing of the Forno during a gale, it was evident he strongly resented the presence of both Spencer and the guide. Helen, after her first eager outburst, was tongue-tied. She saw that her would-be rescuers were dripping wet, and was amazed that Bauer should greet them so curtly, though, to be sure, she believed implicitly that the storm would soon pass. Stamper was already inside the hut. He was haranguing Bath and the porter vehemently, and they were listening with a curious submissiveness. Spencer was the most collected person present. He brushed aside Bauer's acrimony as lightly as he had accepted Helen's embarrassed explanation. "This is not my hustle at all," he said. "Stamper heard that his adored signorina—" "Stamper? Is that Stamper?" Bauer's strident voice was hushed to a hoarse murmur. It reminded one of his hearers of a growling dog suddenly cowed by fear. Helen's ears were tuned to this perplexing note, but Spencer interpreted it according to his dislike of the man. "Stamper heard," he went on, with cold-drawn precision, "that Miss Winton had gone to the Forno. He is by far the most experienced guide to be found on this side of the Alps, and he believes that anyone remaining up here today will surely be imprisoned in the hut a week or more by bad weather. In fact, even now, an hour may make all the difference between danger and safety. Perhaps you can convince him he is wrong. I know nothing about it, beyond the evidence of my senses, backed up by some acquaintance with blizzards. Anyhow, I am inclined to think that Miss Winton will be wise if she listens to the points of the argument in the hotel." "Perhaps it would be better to return at once," said Helen timidly. Her sensitive nature warned her that these two men were ready to quarrel, and that she herself, in some nebulous way, was the cause of their mutual enmity. Beyond this, her intuition could not travel. It was impossible that she should realize how sorely her wish to placate Bauer disquieted Spencer. He had seen the two under conditions that might, indeed, be explicable by Helen's fright, but he would extend no such charitable consideration to Bauer, whose conduct, no matter how it was viewed, made him a rival. Yes, it had come to that. Spencer had hardly spoken a word to Stamper during the toilsome journey from Maloja. He had looked facts stubbornly in the face, and the looking served to clear certain doubts from his heart and brain. He wanted to woo and win Helen for his wife. He was enmeshed in a net of his own contriving, and its strands were too strong to be broken. If Helen was reft from him now, he would gaze on a darkened world for many a day. But he was endowed with a splendid self-control. That element of cast steel in his composition, discovered by Dunstan after 5 minutes' acquaintance, kept him rigid under the strain. "Sorry I should figure as spoiling your excursion, Miss Winton," he was able to say calmly. "But when all is said and done, the weather is bad, and you will have plenty of fine days later." Bauer crept nearer. His action suggested stealth. Although the wind was howling under the deep eaves of the hut, he almost whispered, "Yes, you are right, quite right. Let us go now, at once. With you and me, Mr. Spencer, Miss Winton will be safe, safer than with the guides. They can follow with the stores. Come." "There is no time to be lost." The others were so taken aback by his astounding change of front that they were silent for an instant. It was Helen who protested, firmly enough. "The lightning seems to have given us an attack of nerves," she said. "It would be ridiculous to rush off in that manner. But there is peril, real peril. In delay, I admit it, I was wrong." Bauer's anxiety was only too evident. Spencer, regarding him from a single viewpoint, deemed him a coward, and his gorge rose at the thought. "Oh, nonsense," he cried contemptuously. "We shall be 2 hours on the glacier, so 5 more minutes won't cut any ice." "If you have food and drink in there, Stamper certainly wants both. We all need them. We have to meet that gale all the way. The 2 hours may become 3 before we reach the path." Helen guessed the reason of his disdain. It was unjust, but the moment did not permit of a hint that he was mistaken. To save Bauer from further commitment, which, she was convinced, was due entirely to regard for her own safety, she went into the hut. "Stamper," she said, "I am very much obliged to you for taking so much trouble. I suppose we may eat something before we start." "Assuredly, Fräulein," he cried. "Am I not here? Were it to begin to snow at once, I could still bring you unharmed to the chalets." Joseph Barth had borne Stamper's reproaches with surly deference, but he refused to be degraded in this fashion, before Karl too, whose tongue wagged so loosely. "That is the talk of a foolish boy, not of a man," he cried wrathfully. "Am I not fitted then to take mademoiselle home after bringing her here?" "Truly, on a fine day, Joseph," was the smiling answer. "I told monsieur that a gux was blowing up from the south, so did Karl, but he would not hearken. Ma foi, I am not to blame." Barth, on his dignity, introduced a few words of French picked up from the Shamanics' men. He fancied they would awe Stamper and prove incidentally how wide was his own experience. The old guide only laughed. "A nice pair, you and Karl," he shouted. "Are the voyageurs in your care or not? You told monsieur, indeed. You ought to have refused to take mademoiselle. That would have settled the affair, I fancy." But this monsieur knows as much about the mountains as any of us. He might surprise even you, Stamper. He has climbed the Matterhorn from Zermatt and Broil. He has come down the rock wall on the Col des Nantillons. How is one to argue with such a voyager on this child's glacier? Stamper whistled. Oh, knows the Matterhorn, does he? What is his name? Bauer, said Helen. Mr. Mark Bauer. What? Say that again, Fräulein. Mark Bauer? Is that your English way of putting it? Helen attributed Stamper's low hiss to a tardy recognition of Bauer's fame as a mountaineer. Though the hour was noon, the light was feeble. Veritable thunderclouds had gathered above the mist, and the expression of Stamper's face was almost hidden in the obscurity of the hut. That is his name, she repeated. You must have heard of him. He was well known on the high Alps, years ago. She paused before she added those concluding words. She was about to say, in your time, but the substituted phrase was less personal, since the circumstances under which Stamper ceased to be a notability in the street at Zermatt were in her mind. God in heaven, muttered the old man, passing a hand over his face as though waking from a dream. God in heaven. Can it be that my prayer is answered at last? He shambled out. Spencer had waited to watch the almost continuous blaze of lightning playing on the glacier. Distant summits were now looming through the diminishing downpour of sleet. He was wondering if by any chance Stamper might be mistaken. Bauer stood somewhat apart, seemingly engaged in the same engrossing task. The wind was not quite so fierce as during its first onset. It blew in gusts, no longer screaming in a shrill and sustained note, it wailed fitfully. Stamper lurched unevenly close to Bauer. He was about to touch him on the shoulder, but he appeared to recollect himself in time. Marcus Bauer, he said in a voice that was terrible by reason of its restraint. Bauer wheeled suddenly. He did not flinch. His manner suggested a certain preparedness. Thus might a strong man face a wild beast when hope lay only in the matching of sinew against sinew. That is not my name, he snarled viciously. Marcus Bauer, repeated Stamper in the same repressed monotone. I am Etta's father. Why do you address me in that fashion? I have never before seen you. No, you took care of that. You feared Etta's father, though you cared little for Christian Stamper, the guide. But I have seen you, Marcus Bauer. You were slim then, and elegant, is it not? And many a time have I hobbled into the Hotel Montservin to look at your portrait in a group, lest I should forget your face. Yet I passed you just now. Great God, I passed you. A ferocity glared from Bauer's eyes that might well have daunted Stamper. For an instant he glanced towards Spencer, whose clear-cut profile was silhouetted against a background of white-blue ice now gleaming in a constant flutter of lightning. Stamper was not yet aware of the true cause of Bauer's frenzy. He thought that terror was spurring him to self-defense. An insane impulse to kill, to fight with the nails and teeth, almost mastered him, but that must not be yet. It is useless, Marcus Bauer, he said, with a calmness so horribly unreal that its deadly intent was all the more manifest. I am the avenger, not you. I can tear you to pieces with my hands when I will. It would be here and now were it not for the presence of the English signorina who saved me from death. It is not meet that she should witness your expiation. That is to be settled between you and me alone. Bauer made one last effort to assert himself. You are talking in riddles, man, he said. If you believe you have some long-forgotten grievance against one of my name, come and see me tomorrow at the hotel, perhaps. Yes, I shall see you tomorrow. Do not dream that you can escape me. Now that I know you live, I would search the wide world for you. Blessed mother, how you must have feared me all these years. Stamper was using the Romansh dialect of the Italian Alps. Bauer spoke in German. Spencer heard them indistinctly. He marvelled that they should discuss, as he imagined, the state of the weather with such subdued passion. Hello, Christian, he cried. The clouds are lifting somewhat. Where is your promised snow? Stamper peered up into Bauer's face, for his twisted leg had reduced his own unusual height by many inches. Tomorrow, he whispered, at 10 o'clock, outside the hotel. Then we have a settlement. Is it so? There was no answer. Bauer was wrestling with a mad desire to grapple with him and fling him down among the black rocks. Stamper crept nearer. A ghastly smile lit his rugged features, and his pickle clattered to the broken shingle at his feet. I offer you tomorrow, he said. I am in no hurry. Have I not waited 16 years? But it may be that you are tortured by a devil, Marcus Bauer. Shall it be now? The clean-souled peasant believed that the millionaire had a conscience. Not yet did he understand that balked desire is stronger than any conscience. It really seemed that nothing could withhold these two from mortal struggle then and there. Spencer was regarding them curiously, but they paid no heed to him. Bauer's tongue was darting in and out between his teeth. The red blood surged to his temples. Stamper was still smiling. His lips moved in the strangest prayer that ever came from a man's heart. He was actually thanking the Madonna, mother of the great peacemaker, for having brought his enemy within reach. "Mr. Bauer," came Helen's voice from the door of the cabane, "why don't you join us? And you, Mr. Spencer. Stamper, come here and eat at once. Tomorrow at 10, or now," the old man whispered again. "Tomorrow, curse you." Stamper twisted himself round. "I am not hungry, Fräulein," he cried. "I ate chocolate all the way up the glacier." "But do you be speedy. We have lost too much time already." Hour brushed past, and the guide stooped to recover his ice axe. Spencer, though troubled sufficiently by his own disturbing fantasies, did not fail to notice their peculiar behaviour. But he answered Helen with a pleasant disclaimer. "Christian kept his hoard a secret, Miss Winton. I, too, have lost my appetite," said he. "Once we start, we shall hardly be able to unpack the hamper again," said Helen. The American was trying her temper. She suspected that he carried his hostility to the absurd pitch of refusing to partake of any food provided by Bauer. It was a queer coincidence that Spencer harboured the same notion with regard to Stamper, and wondered at it. "I shall starve willingly," he said. "It will be a just punishment for declining the good things that did not tempt me when they were available." Bauer poured out a quantity of wine and drank it at a gulp. He refilled the glass and nearly emptied it a second time, but he touched not a morsel of meat or bread. Helen, fortunately, attributed the conduct of the men to spleen. She ate a sandwich and found that she was far more ready for a meal than she had imagined. Stamper's broad frame darkened the doorway. He told Karl not to burden himself with anything save the cutlery. Now that he was the skilled guide again, the leader in whom they trusted, his worn face was animated and his voice eager. Helen heard Spencer's exclamation without. "By Jove, Stamper, you are right! Here comes the snow!" "Quick, quick!" cried Stamper. "Vorwärts, Bath. You lead. Stop at my call. Karl next. Then the Fräulein and my monsieur. Yours follows, and I come last." "No, no!" burst out Bauer, lowering a third glass of wine from his lips. "Ci diavolo! It shall be as I have said," shouted Stamper, with an imperious gesture. Helen remarked it, but things were being done and said that were inexplicable. Even Bauer was silenced. "Are we to be roped, then?" growled Barth. "Have you never crossed ice during a snowstorm?" asked Stamper. In a few minutes they were ready. The lightning flashes were less frequent, and the thunder was muttering far away amid the secret places of the Bernina. The wind was rising again. Instead of sleet, it carried snowflakes, and these did not sting the face nor patter on the ice. They tore everywhere, and the sable rocks were taking unto themselves a new garment. "Forwards!" rang out Stamper's trumpet-like call, and Barth leaped down into the moraine. Chapter 10. ONTHE Glacier. Barth, a good man on ice and rock, was not a genius among guides. Faced by an apparently unscalable rock wall, or lost in a wilderness of seracs, he would never guess the one way that led to success. But he was skilled in the technique of his profession, and did not make the mistake now of subjecting Helen or Spencer to the risk of an ugly fall. The air temperature had dropped from 80 degrees Fahrenheit to below freezing point. Rocks that gave safe foothold an hour earlier were now glazed with an amalgam of sleet and snow. If, in his dull mind, he wondered why Spencer came next to Helen rather than Bauer or Stamper, either of whom would know exactly when to give that timely aid with the rope that imparts such confidence to the novice, he said nothing. Stamper's eye was on him. His pride was up in arms. It behooved him to press on at just the right pace and commit no blunder. Helen, who had been glad to get back to the moraine during the ascent, was ready to breathe a sigh of relief when she felt her feet on the ice again. Those treacherous rocks were affrighting. They bereft her of trust in her own limbs. She seemed to slip here and there without power to check herself. She expected at any moment to stumble helplessly on some cruelly sharp angle of a granite boulder, and find that she was maimed so badly as to render another step impossible. More than once she was sensible that the restraining pull on the rope alone held her from disaster. Her distress did not hinder the growth of a certain surprise that the American should be so sure-footed, so quick to judge her needs. When, by his help, a headlong downward plunge was converted into a harmless slide over the sloping face of a rock, she half turned. "I must thank you for that afterward," she said, with a fine effort at a smile. "Eyes front, please," was the quiet answer. Under less strenuous conditions it might have sounded curt, but the look that met hers robbed the words of their tenseness and sent the hot blood tingling in her veins. Bauer had never looked at her like that. Just as some unusually vivid flash of lightning revealed the hidden depths of a crevasse, bringing plainly before the eye chinks and crannies not discernible in the strongest sunlight, so did the glimpse of Spencer's soul illumine her understanding. He was not only safeguarding her, but thinking of her, and the stolen knowledge set up a bewildering tumult in her heart. "Attention!" shouted Barth, halting and making a drive at something with his axe. The line stopped. Stamper's ringing voice came over Helen's head. "What is that ahead there?" "A new fall, I think. We ought to leave the moraine a little lower down, but this was not here when we ascended." How either man, Stamper especially, could see anything at all was beyond the girl's comprehension. The snow was absolutely blinding. The wind was full in their faces, and it carried the huge flakes upward. They seemed to spring from beneath rather than drop from the clouds. Ever and anon, a weirdly blue gleam of lightning would give a demoniac touch to a scene worthy of the inferno. "Make for the ice! Quick!" cried Stamper, and Barth turned sharply to the left. Falling stones were now their chief danger, and both men were anxious to avoid it. After a brief scramble, they mounted the curving glacier. A fiercer gust shrieked at them and swept some small space clear of snow. Helen had a dim vision of lightning playing above the crest of a great mound on the edge of the ice field, a mound that she did not remember seeing before. Then the gale sank back to its sustained howling, the snow swirled in denser volume, and the spectre vanished. Ere they had gone another 100 yards, Barth's hoarse warning checked them again. "A bridge has fallen," was his cry. "There has been an ice movement." There was a question in the man's words. Here was a nice point submitted to his judgment, whether to follow the line of the recently formed schrund yawning at his feet, or endeavour to cross it, or go back to the scene of the landslip. That was where Barth was lacking. In that instant he resigned his pride of place without further effort to retain it. He was in the van, but did not lead. Thenceforth Stamper was master. "What is the width 10 meters?" demanded the old guide cheerfully. "About that." "All the better. It is not deep here. The shock of that avalanche opened it up. You will find a way down. Cut the steps close together. You know how to polish them, Carl." "Yes, I can do that," said the porter. "And watch the signorina's feet." "Yes, I'll take care." Barth was peering fixedly into the chasm. To Helen's fancy it was bottomless, though in reality it was not more than 40 feet deep, and the two walls fell away from each other at a practicable angle. In normal summer weather, a small crevasse always formed there owing to the glacier flowing over a transverse ridge of rock beneath. Today the impact of many thousands of tons of debris had disrupted the ice to an unusual extent. Having decided on the best line, the leading guide stepped over into space. Helen heard his axe ringing as he fashioned secure foothold down the steep ledge he had selected. He was quite trustworthy in such work. Stamper, who had a thought for none save Helen, gave her a reassuring word. "Barth will find a way, Fräulein," he said, "and Herr Spencer knows how you should cross your feet and carry your axe, while Carl will see to your foothold. Remember, too, that you will be at the bottom before I begin the descent, so no harm can come to you. Try and stand straight. Don't lean against the slope. Lean away from it. Don't be afraid. Don't trust to the rope or the grip of the axe. Rely on your own stand." It was no time to pick and choose phrases, yet Helen realized the oddity of the absence of any reference to Bauer. One other in the party had a thought somewhat akin to hers, but he slurred it over in his mind and seized the opportunity to help her by a casual remark. "Guess you hardly expected genuine ice work in today's trip," he said. "Stamper and I had a lot of it last week. It's as easy as walking downstairs when you know how." "I don't think I am afraid," she answered, "but I should have preferred to walk upstairs first. This is rather reversing the natural order of things, isn't it? Nature loves irregularities. That is why the prize girl in every novel has irregular features. A heroine with a Greek face would kill a whole library." "Vorwärts es geht." Barth's gruff voice sounded hollow from the depths. Carl, in his turn, went over the lip of the crevasse. Helen, conscious of an exaltation that lifted her out of the region of ignoble fear, looked down. She could see now what was being done. Barth was swinging his axe and smiting the ice with the adze. His head was just below the level of her feet, though he was distant the full length of 2 sections of the rope. He had cut broad black steps. They did not seem to present any great difficulty. Helen found herself speculating on the remarkable light effects that made these notches black in a grey-green wall. "Right foot first," said Spencer quietly. "When that is firmly fixed, throw all your weight on it and bring the left down, then the right again. Hold the pick breast high." "So," cried Carl appreciatively, watching her first successful effort. As Spencer was lowering himself into the crevasse, he heard something that set his nimble wits agog. Stamper, the valiant and light-hearted Stamper, the genial companion who had laughed and jested even when they were crossing an ice slope on the giant Monte della Disgrazia. A traverse of precarious clinging, where a slip meant death 1,000 feet below, was muttering strangely at Bauer. "Schweinhund," he was saying, "if any evil befalls the Fräulein, I shall drive my axe between your shoulder blades." There was no reply. Spencer was sure he was not mistaken. Though the guide spoke German, he knew enough of that language to understand this comparatively simple sentence. Quite as amazing as Stamper's threat was Bauer's silent acceptance of it. He began to piece together some fleeting impressions of the curious wrangle between the two outside the hut. He recalled Bauer's extraordinary change of tone when told that a man named Christian Stamper had followed him from Maloja. Helen was just taking another confident step forward and down, balancing herself with graceful assurance. Spencer had a few seconds in which to steal a backward glance, and a flash of lightning happened to glimmer on Bauer's features. The American was not given to fanciful imaginings, but during many a wild hour in the far west, he had seen the baleful frown of murder on a man's face, too often not to recognize it now in this snow-scourged cleft of a mighty alpine glacier. Yet he was helpless. He could neither speak nor act on a mere opinion. He could only watch and be on his guard. From that moment he tried to observe every movement not only of Helen, but of Bauer. The members of the party were roped at intervals of 20 feet, allowing for the depth of the crevasse, the amount of rope taken up in their hands ready to be served out as occasion required, and the inclination of Barth's line of descent. The latter ought to be notching the opposing wall before Stamper quitted the surface of the glacier. Though Spencer could not see Stamper now, he knew that the rear guide was bracing himself strongly against any telltale jerk, with the additional security of an anchor obtained by driving the pick of his axe deeply into the surface ice. It was Bauer's business to keep the rope quite taut both above and below. But the American was sure that he was gathering the slack behind him with his right hand while he carried the axe in his left, and did not use it to steady himself. Spencer assumed, from various comments by Helen and others, that Bauer was an adept climber. Therefore the passage of a schrund, or large, shallow crevasse, was child's play to him. This departure from all the canons of the craft, as imparted by Stamper during their first week on the hills together, struck Spencer as exceedingly dangerous. He reflected that were it not for the words he had overheard, he would never have known of this curious proceeding. Indeed, but for those words, with their sinister significance augmented by Bauer's devilish expression, had he even looked back by chance, the manoeuvre might not have attracted his attention. What, then, did it imply? Why should a skilled mountaineer break an imperative rule that permits of no exceptions? He continued to watch Bauer even more closely. He devoted to the task every instant that consideration for Helen's safety and his own would allow. There was not much light in the crevasse. Heavy clouds and the smothering snow wraiths hid the travellers under a dense pall that suggested the approach of night, although the actual time was about 1:30 o'clock in the afternoon. The wind seemed to delight in torturing them with minute particles of ice that stung with a peculiar sensation of burning. These were bad enough. To add to their miseries, fine, powdery snowflakes settled on eyes and eyelids with blinding effect. During a particularly baffling gust, Helen uttered a slight exclamation. Instantly Spencer stiffened himself, and Barth and Carl halted. "It is nothing," she cried. "For a second I could not see." Barth's axe rang out again. The vibrations of each lusty blow could be felt distinctly along the solid ice wall. After a last downward step, he would begin to notch his way up the other side, where the angle was much more favorable to rapid progress. Spencer stole another glance over his shoulder. Bauer had fully 10 feet of the rearmost section of rope in hand. His head was thrown well back. Standing with his face to the ice, he was striving to look over the lip of the schrund. Stamper, feeling a steady tension, must be expecting the announcement momentarily that Barth was crossing the narrow crevice at the bottom. Helen and Carl, intent on the operations of the leader, paid heed to nothing else, but Spencer was fascinated by Bauer's peculiar actions. At last, Barth's deep bass reverberated triumphantly upward. "Vorwärts! Vorwärts, Stamper!" repeated Bauer, suddenly changing the ice axe to his right hand and stretching the left as far along the rope and as high up as possible. Simultaneously, he raised the axe. Then, and not till then, did Spencer understand. Stamper must be on the point of relaxing his grip and preparing to descend. If Bauer cut the rope with a single stroke of the adze, a violent tug at the sundered end would precipitate Stamper headlong into the crevasse, while there would be ample evidence to show that he had himself severed the rope by a miscalculated blow. The fall would surely kill him. When his corpse was recovered, it would be found that the cut had been made much closer to his own body and to that of his nearest neighbour. "Stop!" roared Spencer, all aquiver with wrath at his discovery. Obedience to the climber's law held the others rigid. That command implied danger. It called for an instant tightening of every muscle to withstand the strain of a slip. Even Bauer, a man on the very brink of committing a fiendish crime, yielded to a subconscious acceptance of the law and kept himself braced in his steps. The American was well fitted to handle a crisis of that nature. "Hold fast, Stamper!" he shouted. "What is wrong?" came the ready cry, for the rear guide had already driven the pick of his axe into the ice again after having withdrawn it. Then Spencer spoke English. "I happen to be watching you," he said slowly, never relaxing a steel-cold scrutiny of Bauer's livid face. "You seem to forget what you are doing. Follow me until you have taken up the slack of the rope. Do you understand?" Bauer continued to gaze at him with lack-lustre eyes. All he realized was that his murderous design was frustrated, but how or why he neither knew nor cared. "Do you hear me?" demanded Spencer even more sternly. "Come along, or I shall explain myself more fully." Without answering, the other made shift to move. Spencer, however, meant to save the unwitting guide from further hazard. "Don't stir, Stamper, till I give the order," he sang out. "All right, monsieur, but we are losing time. What is Barth doing there? Sapperlot, if I were in front." Bauer, who owned certain strong qualities, swallowed something, took 3 strides downward, and said calmly, "I was waiting to give Stamper a hand. He's lame, you know." Helen, of course, heard all that passed. She had long since abandoned the effort to disentangle the skein of that day's events. Everybody was talking and acting unnaturally. Perhaps the ravel of things would clear itself when they regained the commonplace world of the hotel. In any case, she wished the men would hurry, for it was unutterably cold in the crevasse. At last, then, there was a movement ahead. Barth began to mount. Muttering an instruction to Carl that he was to give the girl a friendly pull, he cut smaller steps more widely apart and at a steeper gradient. Soon they were on the floor of the ice and hurrying to the next bridge. Not a word was spoken by anyone. The fury of the gale and the ever-gathering snow made it imperative that not a moment should be wasted. The lightning was decreasing perceptibly, while the occasional peals of thunder were scarcely audible above the soughing of the wind. A tremendous crash on the right announced the fall of another avalanche, but it did not affect the next broad crevasse. The bridge they had used a few hours earlier stood firm. Indeed, it was new, welded by regulation, since the sun's rays had disappeared. The leader kept a perfect line, never deviating from the right track. Helen, who had completely lost her bearings, thought they had a long way farther to go when she saw Barth stop and begin to unfasten the rope. Then a thrust with the butt of her pickle told her that she was standing on rock. When she cleared her eyes of the flying snow, she saw a well-defined curving ribbon amid the white chaos. It was the path covered 6 inches deep. The violent exertions of nearly 3 hours since she left the hut had induced a pleasant sense of languor. Did she dare to suggest it, she would have liked to sit down and rest for a while. Bauer, who had substituted reasoned thought for his madness, addressed Spencer with easy complacence while Barth was unroping them. "Why did you believe that I was doing a risky thing in stopping to assist Stamper?" he asked. "I guess you know best," was the uncompromising answer. "Yes, I think I do. Of course, I could not argue the matter then, but I fancy my climbing experience is far greater than yours, Mr. Spencer." His sheer impudence was admirable. He even smiled in the superior way of an expert lecturing a novice. But Spencer did not smile. "Do you really want to hear my views on your conduct?" he said. "No, thanks. The discussion might prove interesting, but we can adjourn it to the coffee and cigar period after dinner." His eyes fell under Spencer's contemptuous glance, yet he carried himself bravely. Though the man he meant to kill, and another man who had read his inmost thought in time to prevent a tragedy, were looking at him fixedly, he turned away with a laugh on his lips. "I am afraid, Miss Winton, you will regard me in future as a broken reed where alpine excursions are concerned," he said. "You were mistaken, that is obvious," said Helen frankly. "But so was Barth." He agreed that the storm would be only a passing affair. Don't you think we are very deeply indebted to Mr. Spencer and Stamper for coming to our assistance? I do, indeed. Stamper one can reward in kind. This sort of thing used to be his business, I hear. As for Mr. Spencer, a smile from you will repay him tenfold. Herr Spencer, broke in Stamper, you go on with the Signorina and see that she does not slip. She is tired. Marcus Bauer and I have matters to discuss. The old man's unwanted harshness appealed to the girl, as did the host of other queer happenings on that memorable day. Bauer moved uneasily. A vindictive gleam shot from his eyes. Helen missed none of this. But she was fatigued, and her feet were cold and wet, while the sleet encountered on the upper glacier had almost soaked her to the skin. Nevertheless, she strove bravely to lighten the cloud that seemed to have settled on the men. That means a wordy warfare, she said gaily. I pity you, Mr. Bauer. You cannot wriggle out of your difficulty. The snow will soon be a foot deep in the valley. Goodness only knows what would have become of us up there in the hut. He bowed gracefully, with a hint of the foreign air she had noted once before. I would have brought you safely out of greater perils, he said, but every dog has his day, and this is Stamper's. En route, cried the guide impatiently. He loathed the sight of Bauer standing there, smiling and courteous, in the presence of one whom he regarded as a heaven-sent friend and protectress. Spencer attributed his surliness to its true cause. It supplied another bit of the mosaic he was slowly piecing together. Greatly as he preferred Helen's company, he was willing to sacrifice at least 10 minutes of it, could he but listen to the discussion between Stamper and Bauer. Therein he would have read greatly. Helen was tired, and she admitted it. She did not decline his aid when the path was steep and slippery. In delightful snatches of talk, they managed to say a good deal to each other, and Helen did not fail to make plain the exact circumstances under which she first caught sight of Spencer outside the hut. When they arrived at the carriage road, which begins at Lake Kavloccio, they could walk side by side and chat freely. Here, in the valley, matters were normal. The snow did not place such a veil on all things. The windings of the road often brought them abreast of the 4 men in the rear. Bauer was trudging along alone, holding his head down and seemingly lost in thought. Close behind him came Stamper and the Engadiners. Karl, of course, was talking. The others might or might not be lending their ears to his interminable gossip. We are outstripping our companions. Don't you think we ought to wait for them? Said Helen once, when Bauer chanced to look her way. No, said Spencer. You are exceedingly positive. I try to be exceedingly negative. But why? I rather fancy that they would jar on us. But Stamper's promised lecture appears to have ended. I think it never began. It is a safe bet that Mr. Bauer and he have not exchanged a word since our last halt. Helen laughed. A genuine case of Greek meeting Greek, she said. Stamper is an excellent guide, I am sure, but Mr. Bauer does really know these mountains. I suppose anyone is liable to err in forecasting alpine weather. That is nothing. If it were you or I, Stamper would dismiss the point with a grin. You heard how he chafed Barth, yet trusted him with the lead, no. These two have an old feud to settle. You will hear more of it. A feud! Mr. Bauer declared to me that Stamper was absolutely unknown to him. It isn't necessary to know a man before you hate him. I can give you a heap of historic examples. For instance, who has a good word to say for Ananias? The girl understood that he meant to parry her question with a quip. The cross purposes so much in evidence all day were baffling and mysterious to its close. My own opinion is that both you and Stamper have taken an unreasonable dislike to Mr. Bauer, she said determinedly. The words were out before she quite realized their import. She flushed a little. Spencer was gazing down into the gorge of the Orlegna. The brawling torrent chimed with his own mood, but his set face gave no token of the storm within. He only said quietly, "How good it must be to have you as a friend." "I have no reason to feel other than friendly to Mr. Bauer," she protested hotly. "It was the rarest good fortune for me that he came to Maloja. I met him once in London, and a second time, by accident, during my journey to Switzerland. Yet, widely known as he is in society, he was sufficiently large-minded to disregard the sneers and innuendos of some of those horrid women in the hotel. He has gone out of his way to show me every kindness. Why should I not repay it by speaking well of him? I shall lay my head on the nearest tree stump, and you can smite me with your axe good and hard," said Spencer. She laughed angrily. "I don't know what evil influence is possessing us," she cried. "Everything is awry. Even the sun refuses to shine. Here am I storming at one to whom I owe my life. No, he broke in decisively. Don't put it that way, because the whole credit of the relief expedition is due to Stamper. Say, Miss Winton, may I square my small services by asking a favour? Oh, yes, indeed. Well then, if it lies in your power, keep Stamper and Bower apart. In any event, don't intervene in their quarrel. So you are quite serious in your belief that there is a quarrel? The American saw again in his mind's eye the scene in the crevasse when Bower had raised his axe to strike. Quite serious, he replied, and the gravity in his voice was so marked that Helen placed a contrite hand on his arm for an instant. Please, I am sorry if I was rude to you just now, she said. I have had a long day, and my nerves are worn to a fine edge. I used to flatter myself that I hadn't any nerves, but they have come to the surface here. It must be the thin air. Then it is a bad place for an American. Ah, that reminds me of something I had forgotten. I meant to ask you how you came to remain in the Meloja. Is that too inquisitive on my part? I can account for the presence of the other Americans in the hotel. They belong to the Paris colony and are interested in tennis and golf. I have not seen you playing either game. In fact, you moon about in solitary grandeur, like myself. Oh dear. What a string of questions. Is it true that you wanted to play baccarat with Mr. Bower for £1,000? It is true that I agreed to share a bank with Mr. Dunstan, and the figure you mention was suggested, but I backed out of the proposition. Why? Because your friend, Mr. Hare, thought he was responsible, in a sense having introduced me to Dunstan. So I let up on the idea, just to stop him from feeling bad about it. You really meant to play in the first instance? Yes. Well, it was very wicked of you. Only the other day you were telling me how hard you had to work before you saved your first £1,000. From that point of view, my conduct was idiotic. But I would like to carry the story a little further, Miss Winton. I was in a mood that night to oppose Mr. Bower for a much more valuable stake if the chance offered. It is rather shocking, said Helen. I suppose so. Of course, there are prizes in life that cannot be measured by monetary standards. He was not looking at the Orlegna now, and the girl by his side well knew it. The great revelation that flooded her soul with light while crossing the Forno came back with renewed power. She did not pretend to herself that the words were devoid of a hidden meaning, and her heart fluttered with subtle ecstasy. But she was proud and self-reliant, so proud that she crushed the tumult in her breast, so self-reliant that she was able to give him a timid smile. That deals with the second head of the indictment, then, she said lightly. Now for the first. Why did you select the Engadine for your holiday? If I could tell you that, I should know something of the occult impulses that govern men's lives. One minute I was in London, meaning to go north. The next I was hurrying to buy a ticket for Stan Moritz. But, she meant to continue, you arrived here the same day as I did. Somehow that did not sound quite the right thing to say. Her tongue tripped, but she forced herself to frame a sentence. It is odd that you, like myself, should have hit upon an out-of-the-way place like Meloja. The difference is that I was sent here, whereas you came of your own free will. I guess you are right, said he, laughing as though she had uttered an exquisite joke. Yes, that is just it. I can imagine two young English swallows meeting in Algeria in the winter, twittering explanations of the same sort. I don't feel a bit like a swallow, and I am sure I can't twitter. And as for Algeria, a home of sunshine, well, just look at it. She waved a hand at the darkening panorama of hills and pine woods, all etched in black lines and masses, where rocks and trees and houses broke the dead white of the snow mantle. They happened to be crossing a bridge that spans the Orlegna before it takes its first frantic plunge towards Italy. Bower, who had quickened his pace, took the gesture as a signal and sent an answering flourish. Helen stopped. He evidently wished to overtake them. More explanations, murmured Spencer. But he was mistaken. I was calling nature to witness that your simile was not justified. Tell you what, he said in a low voice, if this storm has blown over by the morning, meet me after breakfast and we will walk down the valley to Vicosoprano for luncheon. There is a diligence back in the afternoon. We can stroll there in 3 hours, and I shall have time to clear up this swallow proposition. That will be delightful if the weather improves. It will. I will compel it. Bower was nearing them rapidly. A constrained silence fell between them. To end it, Helen cried, Well, are you feeling duly humbled, Mr. Bower? He did not seem to understand her meaning. Apparently, he might have forgotten that Stamper still lived. Then he roused his wits with an effort. Not humbled, but elated, he said. Have I not led you to feats of daring? Do. Why, the rag girls will be green with envy when they hear of your exploits. He swung round the corner to the bridge. After a smiling glance at Spencer's impassive face, he turned to Helen. You have come out of the ordeal with flying colours, he said. That flower you picked on the way up has not withered. Give it to me as a memento. The words were almost a challenge. The girl hesitated. No, she said, I must find you some other souvenir. But I want that, if there is no if. You forget that I took it from the boulder marked by a cross. I am not superstitious, nor am I. Nevertheless, I should not care to give you such a symbol. She caught Bauer and Spencer exchanging a strange look. These men shared some secret that they sedulously kept from her. Perhaps the American meant to enlighten her during their projected walk to Vicasoprano. Stamper and the others approached. Together they climbed the little hill leading to the summit of the pass. In the village they said good night to the two guides and Karl. Helen promised laughingly to make the acquaintance of Johann Clucker's cat at the first opportunity. She was passing through a wicket that protects the footpath across the golf links when she heard Stamper growl, "Morgen früh! Ja!" snapped Bauer. She smiled to herself at the thought that things were going to happen tomorrow. She was right. But she had not yet done with the present day. When she entered the cosy and brilliantly lighted veranda of the hotel, the first person her amazed eyes alighted upon was Millicent Jacks. Chapter 11. Wherein Helen lives a crowded hour. Millicent, you here? Helen breathed the words in an undertone that carried more than a hint of dismay. It was one of those rare crises in life when the brain receives a presage of evil without any prior foundation of fact. Helen had every reason to welcome her friend, none to be chilled by her unexpected presence. Among a small circle of intimate acquaintances, she counted Millicent Jacques the best and truest. They had drifted apart, but that was owing to Helen's lack of means. She was not able, nor did she aspire, to mix in the society that hailed the actress as a bright particular star. Yet it meant much to a girl earning her daily bread in a heedless city that she should possess one friend of her own age and sex who could speak of the golden years when they were children together. The years when Helen's father was the prospective governor of an Indian province as large as France, when the tuft hunters now gathered in Malosia would have fawned on her mother in hope of subsequent recognition. Why then did Helen falter in her greeting? Who can tell? She herself did not know, unless it was that Millicent rose so leisurely from the table at which she was drinking a belated cup of tea and came toward her with a smile that had no warmth in it. So you have returned, she said, and with both cavaliers. Helen was conscious of a queer humming noise in her head. She was incapable of calm thought. She realized now that the friend she had left in London was here in the guise of a bitter enemy. The veranda was full of people waiting for the post. The snow had banished them from links and tennis court. This August afternoon was dark as mid-December at the same hour. But the rendezvous was brilliantly lighted, and the reappearance of the climbers, whose chances of safety had been eagerly debated since the snowstorm began, drew all eyes. Someone had whispered, too, that the beautiful woman who arrived from St. Moritz half an hour earlier, who sat in her furs and sipped her tea after a long conversation with a clerk in the bureau, was none other than Millicent Jacks, the dancer, one of the leading lights of English musical comedy. The peepers and whisperers little dreamed that she could be awaiting the party from the fourneau. Now that her vigil was explained, for Bauer had advanced with ready smile and outstretched hand, the Rags and Vavasors and Della Veres, all the little coterie of gossips and scandalmongers, were drawn to the centre of the hall like steel filings to a magnet. Millicent ignored Bauer. She was young enough and pretty enough to feel sure of her ability to deal with him subsequently. Her cornflower blue eyes glittered. They held something of the quiet menace of a crevasse. She had travelled far for revenge, and she did not mean to forego it. Helen, whose second impulse was to kiss her affectionately, with excited clamour of welcome and inquiry, stood rooted to the floor by her friend's strange words. I am so surprised," she half stammered in an agony of confused doubt, and that was the only lame phrase she could utter during a few trying seconds. Bauer frowned. He hated scenes between women. With his first glimpse of Millicent, he guessed her errand. For Helen's sake, in the presence of that rabbit-eared crowd, he would not brook the unmerited flood of sarcastic indignation which he knew was trembling on her lips. "Miss Winton has had an exhausting day," he said coolly. "She must go straight to her room and rest. You two can meet and talk after dinner." Without further preamble, he took Helen's arm. Millicent barred the way. She did not give place. Again she paid no heed to the man. "I shall not detain you long," she said, looking only at Helen, and speaking in a low, clear voice that her stage training rendered audible throughout the large hall. "I only wished to assure myself that what I was told was true. I found it hard to believe even when I saw your name written up in the hotel. Before I go, let me congratulate you on your conquest. And Mr. Mark Bower on his," she added, with clever pretence of afterthought. Helen continued to stare at her helplessly. Her lips quivered, but they uttered no sound. It was impossible to misunderstand Millicent's object. She meant to wound and insult in the grossest way. Bower dropped Helen's arm and strode close to the woman who had struck this shrewd blow at him. "I give you this one chance," he muttered, while his eyes blazed into hers. "Go to your room, or sit down somewhere till I am free. I shall come to you and put things straight that now seem crooked. You are wrong, horribly wrong, in your suspicions. Wait my explanation, or by all that I hold sacred, you will regret it to your dying hour." Millicent drew back a little. She conveyed the suggestion that his nearness was offensive to her nostrils, and she laughed, with due semblance of real amusement. "What? Has she made a fool of you too?" she cried bitingly. Then Helen did exactly the thing she ought not to have done. She fainted. Spencer, in his own vivid phrase, was looking for trouble the instant he caught sight of the actress. Had some Mahatma-devised magic lantern focused on the screen of his inner consciousness, a complete narrative of the circumstances which conspired to bring Millicent Jacks to the upper Engadine, he could not have mastered cause and effect more fully. The unlucky letter he asked Mackenzie to send to the Wellington Theatre, the letter devised as a probe into Bower's motives, but which was now cruelly searching its author's heart, had undoubtedly supplied to a slighted woman the clue to her rival's identity. Better posted than Bower in the true history of Helen's visit to Switzerland, he did not fail to catch the most significant word in Millicent's scornful greeting. And with both cavaliers, in all probability, she knew the whole ridiculous story, reading into it the meaning lent by jealous spleen, and no more to be convinced of error than the Forno glacier could be made to flow backward. But if his soul was vexed by a sense of bygone folly, his brain was cool and alert. He saw Helen sway slightly. He caught her before she collapsed where she stood. He gathered her tenderly in his arms. She might have been a tired child, fallen asleep too soon. Her limp head rested on his shoulder. Through the meshes of her blue veil he could see the sudden pallor of her cheeks. The tint of the silk added to the lifelessness of her aspect. Just then Spencer's heart was sore within him, and he was an awkward man to oppose. George de Courcy-Vavasour happened to crane his neck nearer at the wrong moment. The American sent him flying with a vigorous elbow thrust. He shoved Bower aside with scant ceremony. Millicent Jacks met a steely glance that quelled the vengeful sparkle in her own eyes and caused her to move quickly, lest, perchance, this pale-faced American should trample on her. Before Bower could recover his balance, for his hobnails caused him to slip on the tiled floor, Spencer was halfway across the inner hall and approaching the elevator. An official of the hotel hastened forward with ready proffer of help. "This way," he said sympathetically. The lady was overcome by the heat after so many hours in the intense cold. "It often occurs. She will recover soon. Bring her to a chair in the office." But Spencer was not willing that Helen's first wondering glance should rest on strangers, or that, when able to walk to her own apartments, she should be compelled to pass through the ranks of gapers in the lounge. "No," he said. "Ring for the elevator. This lady must be taken to her room, number 80, I believe. Then the manageress and a chambermaid can attend to her. Quick, the elevator." Bower turned on Millicent like an angry bull. "You have chosen your own method," he growled. "Very well, you shall pay for it." Her venom was such that she was by no means disturbed by his threat. "The other man, the American who brought her here, seems to have bested you throughout," she taunted him. He drew himself up with a certain dignity. He was aware that every tongue in the place was stilled, that every ear was tuned to catch each note of this fantastic quartet, a sonata appassionata in which vibrated the souls of men and women. He looked from Millicent's pallid face to the faces of the listeners, some of whom made pretence of polite indifference, while others did not scruple to exhibit their eager delight. If nothing better, the episode would provide an abundance of spicy gossip during the enforced idleness caused by the weather. "The lady whom you are endeavouring to malign will, I hope, do me the honour of becoming my wife," he said. That being so, she is beyond the reach of the slanderous malice of an ex-chorus girl. He spoke slowly, with the air of a man who weighed his words. A thrill that could be felt ran through his intent audience. Mark Bower, the millionaire, the financial genius who dominated more than one powerful group in the city, who controlled a ring of theatres in London and the provinces, who had declined a knighthood and would surely be created a peer with the next change of government. That he should openly declare himself the suitor for the hand of a penniless girl was a sensation with a vengeance. His description of Millicent as an ex-chorus girl offered another bonne bouche to the crowd. She would never again skip airily behind the footlights of the Wellington or any other important theatre in England. So far as she was concerned, the musical comedy candle that succeeded to the sacred lamp of West End burlesque was snuffed out. Millicent was actress enough not to flinch from the goad. "A charming and proper sentiment," she cried with well-simulated flippancy. "The marriage of Mr. Mark Bower will be quite a fashionable event, provided always that he secures the assent of the American gentleman who is paying his future wife's expenses during her present holiday." Now, so curiously constituted is human nature, or the shallow worldliness that passes current for it among the homeless gadabouts who pose as British society on the continent, that already the current of opinion in the hotel was setting steadily in Helen's favour. The remarkable change dated from the moment of Bower's public announcement of his matrimonial plans. Many of those present were regretting a lost opportunity. It was obvious to the meanest intelligence, and the worn phrase took a new vitality when applied to some among the company, that any kindness shown to Helen during the preceding fortnight would be repaid 100-fold when she became Mrs. Mark Bower. Again, not even the bitterest of her critics could allege that she was flirting with the quiet-mannered American who had just carried her off like a new Paris. She had lived in the same hotel for a whole week without speaking a word to him. If anything, she had shown favour only to Bower, and that in a way so decorous and discreet that more than one woman there was amazed by her careless handling of a promising situation. Just give one of them the chance of securing such a prize fish as this stalwart millionaire. Well, at least he should not miss the hook for lack of a bait. Oddly enough, the Reverend Philip Hare gave voice to a general sentiment when he interfered in the duel. He, like others, was waiting for his letters. He saw Helen come in, and was hurrying to offer his congratulations on her escape from the storm, when the appearance of Millicent prevented him from speaking at once. The little man was hot with vexation at the scene that followed. He liked Helen, he was unutterably shocked by Millicent's attack, and he resented the unfair and untrue construction that must be placed on her latest innuendo. "As one who has made Miss Winton's acquaintance in this hotel," he broke in vehemently, "I must protest most emphatically against the outrageous statement we have just heard. If I may say it, it is unworthy of the lady who is responsible for it. I know nothing of your quarrel, nor do I wish to figure in it, but I do declare, on my honour as a clergyman of the Church of England, that Miss Winton's conduct in Maloja has in no way lent itself to the inference one is compelled to draw from the words used." "Thank you, Mr. Hare," said Bower quietly, and a subdued murmur of applause buzzed through the gathering. "There is a legend in Zermatt that Saint Theodule, patron of the Valais, wishing to reach Rome in a hurry, sought demoniac aid to surmount the impassable barrier of the Alps. Opening his window, he saw 3 devils dancing merrily on the housetops. He called them. 'Which of you is the speediest?' he asked. 'I,' said one. 'I am swift as the wind.' 'Bah!' cried the second. 'I can fly like a bullet.' 'These 2 talk idly,' said the third. 'I am quick as the thought of a woman.' The worthy prelate chose the third. The hour being late, he bargained that he should be carried to Rome and back before cockcrow, the price of the service to be his saintly soul. As the imp flew well, and returned to the valley of the Rhone long ere dawn. Joyous at his gain, he was about to bound over the wall of the episcopal city of Sion when Saint Theodule roared lustily, "Coq, chante! Que tu chantes, ou que jamais plus tu ne chantes." Every cock in Sion awoke at his voice, and raised such a din that the devil dropped a bell given to his saintship by the Holy Father, and Saint Theodule was snug and safe inside it. The prelate was right in his choice of the third. The thoughts of 2 women took wings instantly. Mrs. de la Vere, throwing away a half-smoked cigarette, hurried out of the veranda. Millicent Jacques, whose carriage was ready for the long drive to St. Moritz, decided to remain in Maloja. The outer door opened, with a rush of cold air and a whirl of snow. People expected the postman, but Stamper entered. Only Stamper, the broken survivor of the little band of guides who conquered the Matterhorn. He doffed his alpine hat and seemed to be embarrassed by the unusually large throng assembled in the passageway. Bauer saw him and strode away into the dimly lighted foyer. "Pardon, sieurs et dames," said Stamper, advancing with his uneven gait, a venerable and pathetic figure, the wreck of a giant, a man who had aged years in a single day. He went to the bureau and asked permission to seek Herr Spencer in his room. Helen was struggling back to consciousness when Mrs. de la Verre joined the kindly women who were loosening her bodice and chafing her hands and feet. The first words the girl heard were in English. A woman's voice was saying cheerfully, "There, my dear," a simple formula of marvelous recuperative effect. "There now. You are all right again. But your room is bitterly cold. Won't you come into mine? It is quite near, and my stove has been alight all day." Helen, opening her eyes, found herself gazing up at Mrs. de la Verre. Real sympathy ranks high among good deeds. The girl's lips quivered. Returning life brought with it tears. The woman whom she had regarded as a social butterfly sat beside her on the bed and placed a friendly arm round her neck. "Don't cry, you dear thing," she cooed gently. "There is nothing to cry about. You are a bit overwrought, of course, but as it happens, you have scored heavily off all of us, and not least off the creature who upset you. Now, do try and come with me. Here are your slippers. The corridor is empty. It is only a few steps. Come with you? Yes, you are shivering with the cold, and my room is gloriously warm. But there are no buts. Marie will bring a basin of nice hot soup. While you are drinking it, she will set your stove going. I know exactly how you feel. The whole world is topside-turvy, and you don't think there is a smile in your makeup, as that dear American man who carried you here would say." Helen recovered her senses with exceeding rapidity. Mrs. de la Verre was already leading her to the door. "What, Mr. Spencer, did he—" "He did. Come now. I shall tell you all the trying details when you are seated in my easy chair and wrapped in the duckiest Shetland shawl that a red-headed laird sent me last Christmas." "Excellent. Of course you can walk. Isn't every other woman in the hotel well aware how you got that lovely figure?" "Yes, in that chair. And here is the shawl. It's just like being cuddled by a woolly lamb." Mrs. de la Verre turned the keys in 2 doors. "Reggie always knocks," she explained, "but some inquisitive cat may follow me here, and I am sure you don't wish to be gushed over now, after everybody has been so horrid to you." "You were not," said Helen gratefully. "Yes, I was, in a way. I hate most women, but I admired you ever since you took the conceit out of that giddy husband of mine. If I didn't speak, it arose from sheer laziness, a sort of drifting with the stream, in tow of the General and that old mischief-maker, Mrs. Vavasour. I'm sorry, and you will be quite justified tomorrow morning in sailing past me and the rest as though we were beetles." Then Helen laughed, feebly, it is true, but with a genuine mirth that chased away momentarily the ever-growing memory of Millicent's injustice. "Why do you mention beetles?" she asked. "It is part of my everyday work to classify them." Mrs. de la Verre was puzzled. "I believe you have said something very cutting," she cried. "If you did, we deserve it. But please tell me the joke. I shall hand it on to the rags." "There is no joke. I act as secretary to a German professor of entomology. Insects, you know, he makes beetles a specialty." The other woman's eye danced. "It is all very funny," she said, "and I still have my doubts. Never mind. I want to atone for earlier shortcomings. I felt that someone really ought to tell you what took place in the outer foyer after you sank gracefully out of the act. Mr. Bauer—" A tap on the door leading into the corridor interrupted her. It was Marie, armed with chicken broth and dry toast. Mrs. de la Verre, who seemed to be filled with an honest anxiety to place Helen at her ease, persuaded her to begin sipping the compound. "Well, what did Mr. Bauer do?" demanded Helen, who was wondering now why she had fainted. The accusation brought against her by Millicent Jacques was untrue. Why should it disturb her so gravely? It did not occur to her that the true cause was physical, a too sudden change of temperature. "He sat on that young woman from the Wellington Theatre very severely, I assure you. From her manner we all imagined she had some sort of claim on him, but if she was labouring under any such delusion he cured her. He said, 'Are you really strong enough to stand a shock?' 20 shocks. I can't think how I could have been so silly. Nerves, my dear. We all have 'em. Sometimes, if I didn't smoke, I should scream. No woman really likes to see her husband flirting openly with her friends. I'm no saint, but my wickedness is defensive. Now, are you ready?" "Quite ready. Mr. Bauer told us, tout le monde, you know, that he meant to marry you." "Oh," said Helen. During an appreciable pause, neither woman spoke. Helen was not sure whether she wanted to laugh or be angry. Mrs. de la Vere eyed her curiously. The girl's face was yet white and drawn. It was impossible to guess how the great news affected her. The de la Veres were poor on 2,000 a year. What did it feel like to be the prospective bride of a millionaire, especially when you were, what was it, secretary to a man who collected beetles? "Did Mr. Bower assign any reason for making that remarkable statement?" said Helen at last. "He explained that the fact, I suppose it is a fact, would safeguard you from the malice of an ex-coryphée. Indeed, he put it more brutally. He spoke of the slanderous malice of an ex-chorus girl. The English term sounds a trifle harsher than the French, don't you think?" It began to dawn on Helen that Mrs. de la Vere's friendliness might have a somewhat sordid foundation. Was she tending her merely to secure the freshest details of an affair that must be causing many tongues to wag? "I am acquiring new theories of life since I came to Maloja," she said slowly. "One would have thought that I might be the first person to be made aware of Mr. Bower's intentions." "Oh, this is really too funny. May I light a cigarette?" "Please do. And now it is my turn to ask you to point out the exquisite humour of the situation. Don't be vexed with me, child. You needn't say another word if you don't wish it, but surely you are not annoyed because I have given you the tip as to what took place in the hall. You have been exceedingly good." "No, I haven't. I was just as nasty as the others, and I sneered like the rest when Bower showed up a fortnight since. I was wrong, and I apologize for it. Regard me as in sackcloth and ashes. But my heart went out to you when you dropped like a log among all those staring people. I've done it myself, and my case was worse than yours. Once in my life I loved a man, and I came home one day from the hunting field to read a telegram from the War Office. He was missing, it said, missing, in a rearguard action in Tyra. Do you know what that means?" A cloud of smoke hid her face, but it could not stifle the sob in her voice. There was a knock at the door. "Are you there, Edith?" demanded Reginald de la Vere. "Yes. Go away, I'm busy." "But, go away, I tell you." Then she jerked a scornful hand toward the door. "6 months later I was married. Men who are missed among the Afridis don't come back," she said. "I'm more sorry than I can put into words," murmured Helen. "For goodness sake, don't let us grow sentimental. Shall we return to our sheep? Don't be afraid that I shall pasture the goats in the hall on your confidences. Hasn't Bower asked you?" "No." Then his action was all the more generous. He meant to squelch that friend of yours. "Is she your friend?" "She used to be," said Helen sadly. "And what do you mean to do about it? You will marry Bower, of course?" Helen's heart fluttered. Her colour rose in a sudden wave. I don't think so," she breathed. "Don't you? Well, I like you the better for saying so. I can picture myself putting the same questions to one of the rag girls, to both of them, in fact. I am older than you, and very much wiser in some of the world's ways, and my advice is, don't marry any man unless you are sure you love him. If you do love him, you may keep him, for men are patient creatures. But that is for you to decide. I can't help you there. I am mainly concerned for the moment in helping you over the ice during the next day or two. If you will let me, that is. Probably you have determined not to appear in public tonight. That will be a mistake. Wear your prettiest frock and dine with Reggie and me. We shall invite Mr. Bower to join us and 2 other people. Some man and woman I can depend on to keep things going. If we laugh and kick up no end of a noise, it will not only worry the remainder of the crowd, but you score heavily off the theatrical lady." "See? I can see that you are acting the part of the Good Samaritan," cried Helen. "Oh dear, no, nothing so antiquated. Look at your future position, the avowed wife of a millionaire. What, as Georgie says. But I am not anything of the kind. Mr. Bower is all right. He has the recognized history of the man who makes a good husband, and you can't help liking him unless there is another man." "There, at least, I am." Helen hesitated. Something gripped her heart and checked the modest protestation of her freedom. Mrs. de la Vere laughed. "If you are not sure, you are safe," she said, with a hard ring in her utterance that belied her easygoing philosophy. "Really, you bring me back a lost decade. Now, Helen, may I call you Helen?" "Yes, indeed." "Well then, don't forget that my name is Edith. You have just half an hour to dress. I need every second of the time, so off you run to your room. As I hear Reggie flinging his boots around next door, I shall hurry him and arrange about the table. Call for me. We must go to the foyer together. Now kiss me, there's a dear." Helen was wrestling with her refractory tresses. for the coiffure that suits glaciers and tam-o'-shanters is not permissible in evening dress, when a servant brought her a note. "Dear Mrs. Winton," it ran, "if you are able to come down to dinner, why not dine with me? Sincerely, Charles K. Spencer." She blushed and laughed a little. "I am in demand," she thought, flashing a pardonable glance at her own face in the mirror. She read the brief invitation again. Spencer had a trick of printing the K in his signature. It caught her fancy. It suggested strength, trustworthiness. She did not know then that one of the shrewdest scoundrels in the Western States had already commented on certain qualities betokened by that letter in Spencer's name. "I cannot refuse," she murmured. "To be candid, I don't want to refuse. What shall I do?" Bidding the servant wait, she twisted her hair into a coil, threw a wrap round her shoulders, and tapped on Mrs. de la Verre's door. "Entrees," cried that lady. "I am in a bit of difficulty," said Helen. "Mr. Spencer wishes me to dine with him. Would you—" "Certainly. I'll ask him to join us. Reggie will see him too. Really, Helen, this is amusing. I am beginning to suspect you." So Spencer received a surprising answer. He read it without any sign of the amusement Mrs. de la Verre extracted from the situation, for Helen took care to recite the whole arrangement. "I'm going through with this," he growled savagely. "Even if I have to drink Bauer's health, damn him." Chapter 12. The Allies. Seldom, if ever, has a more strangely assorted party met at dinner than that which gathered in the Hotel Cossale under the social wing of Mrs. de la Verre. Her husband, while being coached in essentials, was the first to discover its incongruities. "Where Miss Winton is concerned, you are warned off," his wife told him dryly. "You must console yourself with Mrs. Badminton, Smythe. She will stand anything to cut out a younger and prettier woman." "Where do you come in, Eddie?" said he, for Mrs. de la Verre's delicate aristocratic beauty seemed to be the natural complement of her sporting style, and tonight there was a wistful charm in her face that the lively Reginald had not seen there before. She turned aside, busying herself with her toilet. "I don't come in." "I went out 5 years ago," she cried with a mocking laugh. "Do you know," he muttered, "I often wonder why the deuce you and I got married." "Because, sweet Reginald, we were made for each other by a wise providence. What other woman of your acquaintance would tolerate you? As a husband?" "Oh, dash it all." "If it comes to that, for goodness sake, don't fuss, or begin to think. Run away and interview the head waiter. Then you are to buttonhole Bauer and the American. I am just sending a chit to the Badminton Smythes. Who is my partner? Lulu, of course." De la Verre was puzzled and looked it. "I suppose it is all right," he growled. "Still, I can't help thinking you've got something up your sleeve, Eddie." She stamped a very pretty foot angrily. "Do as I tell you. Didn't you hear what Bauer said? He will be everlastingly obliged to us for coming to the rescue in this fashion. Next time you have a flutter in the city, his friendship may be useful." "By gad!" cried Reginald, beginning, as he fancied, to see light. "Something seems to have bitten you this evening. Tell you what, Lulu is a non-runner. Get Bauer to put you onto a soft thing in Africans, and you and I will have a second honeymoon in Madeira next winter. Honour bright. I mean it." She seized a silver-mounted brush from the dressing-table with the obvious intent of speeding his departure. He dodged out and strolled down the corridor. "Never saw Eddie in that sort of tantrum before," he said to himself. "If she only knew how sick I was of all this jolly rot, perhaps we'd run better in double harness." So it came to pass, when the company assembled in the great dining-room, that Bauer sat on Mrs. de la Verre's left and Spencer on her right. Beyond them, respectively, were Lulu Badminton, Smythe and her husband, and between these latter were de la Verre and Helen. Thus the girl was separated from the 2 men whom her shrewd-eyed hostess had classed as rivals, while the round table made possible a general conversation. The talk could hardly fail to turn on the day's adventures. Spencer, who had never before in his life thrust himself forward in a social gathering, did so now with fixed purpose. He meant to eclipse Bauer in a territory where that polished man of the world was accustomed to reign unchallenged. But he had the wisdom to wait. He guessed, not without good cause, that more than one late arrival would pause beside their table and make polite inquiries as to the climber's well-being. These interruptions were fatal to Bauer's well-balanced periods. The journey to the hut, therefore, was dealt with jerkily. When Spencer took up the thread, he caught and held the attention of his hearers. In this he was helped considerably by his quaint idioms. To English ears, American expressions are always amusing. Spencer, of course, could speak quite as correct English as anyone present, but he realized that in this instance a certain amount of picturesque exaggeration would lend itself to humor. His quick ear, too, had missed none of the queer mixture of prayers and objurgations with which Carl and the two guides hailed every incident. His selection set them all in a roar. In fact, they were the liveliest party in the room. Many an eye was drawn by a merriment that offered such striking contrast to the dramatic episode in the outer hall. "The one person missing from that crowd is the stage lady," was Miss Gladys Ragg's caustic comment, when Badminton Smythe evoked a fresh outburst by protesting that he forgot to eat his fish owing to Spencer's beastly funny yarn. And Miss Ragg's criticism was justified. It only needed Millicent's presence to add a wizard's touch to the amazement with which Mrs. Vavasor and others of her kind regarded the defection of the de Laveresse and the Badminton Smythes. But Millicent was dining in her own room. The last thing she dreamed of was that Helen would face the other residents in the hotel after the ordeal she had gone through an hour earlier. She half expected that Bower would endeavour to meet her privately while dinner was being served. She was ready for him. She prepared a number of sarcastic little speeches, each with a subtle venom of its own, and even rehearsed a pose or two with a view towards scenic effect. But she had neither taken Bower's measure nor counted on Mrs. de la Verre's superior strategy. All that happened was that she ate a lukewarm meal and was left to wonder at her one-time admirer's boldness in accepting a situation that many a daring man would have striven to evade. After dinner, it was the custom of the habitués to break up into small groups and arrange the night's amusement. Dancing claimed the younger element, while card games had their devotees. Mrs. de la Verre danced invariably, but tonight she devoted herself to Helen. She was under no illusions. Bower and Spencer were engaged in a quiet duel, and the victor meant to monopolize the girl for the remainder of the evening. That was preventable. They could fight their battle on some other occasion. At present there was one thing of vital importance. The unpleasant impression created by the actress's bitter attack must be dissipated, and Mrs. de la Verre, secretly marvelling at her own enthusiasm, aimed at the achievement. "Don't be drawn away from me on any pretext," she whispered, linking her arm through Helen's as they passed out into the foyer. "And be gracious to everybody, even to those who have been most cattish." Helen was far too excited and grateful to harbour animosity. Moreover, she dreaded the chance of being left alone with Bower. As he had already declared his intentions publicly, she was sure he would seize the first opportunity to ask her to marry him. And what would be her answer? She hardly knew. She must have time to think. She must search her own heart. She almost flinched from the succeeding thought. Was it that her soul had found another mate? If that was so, she must refuse Bower, though the man she was learning to love might pass out of her life and leave her desolate. She liked Bower, even respected him. Never for an instant had the notion intruded that he had followed her to Switzerland with an unworthy motive. To her mind, nothing could be more straightforward than their acquaintance. The more she reflected on Millicent Jark's extraordinary conduct, the more she was astounded by its utter baselessness. And Bower was admirable in many ways. He stood high in the opinion of the world. He was rich, cultured, and seemingly very deeply enamoured of her undeserving self. What better husband could any girl desire? He would give her everything that made life worth living. Indeed, if the truth must be told, she was phenomenally lucky. Thus did she strive to silence misgivings, to quell doubt, to order and regulate a blurred medley of subconscious thought. While laughing and talking and making the most successful efforts to be at ease with the dozens of people who came and spoke to Mrs. de la Verre and herself, she felt like some frail vessel dancing blithely in a swift, smooth current, yet hastening ever to the verge of a cataract. And once Bower approached, skilfully piloting Mrs. Badminton Smythe, for Reginald, tiring of the role thrust on him by his wife, had gone to play bridge. It was his clear intent to take Helen from her chaperone. "It is still snowing, though not so heavily," he said. "Come on the veranda and look at the landscape. The lake is a pool of ink in the middle of a white tablecloth." "The snow will be far more visible in the morning, and we have a lot of ice to melt here," interposed Mrs. de la Verre quickly. The man and woman, both well versed in the ways of society, looked each other squarely in the eye. Though disappointed, the man understood, was even appreciative. "Miss Winton is fortunate in her friends," he said, and straightway went to the writing-room. He felt that Helen was safe with this unexpected ally. he could afford to bide his time. Nothing could now undo the effect of his open declaration while flouting Millicent Jarks. If he gave that wayward young person a passing thought, it was one of gladness that she had precipitated matters. There remained only an unpleasant meeting with Stamper in the morning. He shuddered at the recollection that he had nearly done a foolish thing while crossing the crevasse. What sinister influence could have so weakened his nerve as to make him think of murder? Crime was the last resource of impaired intellect. He was able to laugh now at the stupid memory of it. True, the American. By the way, what did Millicent mean by her shrewish cry that Spencer was paying for Helen's holiday? So engrossed was he in other directions that his early doubts with regard to the Firefly's unprecedented enterprise in sending a representative to this out-of-the-way Swiss valley had been lulled to sleep. Of course he had caused certain inquiries to be made. That was his method. One of the telegrams he dispatched from Zurich after Helen's train bustled off to Coya started the investigation. Thus far, a trusted clerk could only ascertain that the newspaper had undoubtedly commissioned the girl on the lines indicated. Still, the point demanded attention. He resolved to telegraph further instructions in the morning, with Spencer's name added as a clue, though, to be sure, he was not done with Millicent yet. He would reckon with her also on the morrow. Perhaps, if he annoyed her sufficiently, she might explain that cryptic taunt. Could he have seen a letter that was brought to Spencer's room before dinner, the telegram would not have been written. Mackenzie, rather incoherent with indignation, sent a hurried scrawl. "Dear Mr. Spencer," it ran, "a devil of a thing has happened. Today," the date being 3 days old, "I went out to lunch, leaving a thick-headed subeditor in charge. I had not been gone 10 minutes when a stage fairy, all frills and flounces, whisked into the office and asked for Miss Winton's address. My assistant succumbed instantly. He was nearly asphyxiated with joy at being permitted to entertain, not unawares, that angel of musical comedy, Miss Millicent Jarks. His maundering excuse is that you yourself seem to acknowledge Miss Jakes's right to be acquainted with her friend's whereabouts. I have good reason to believe that the frail youth not only spoke of Maloja, but supplied such details as were known to him of your kindness in the matter. I have cursed him extensively, but that can make no amends. At any rate, I feel that you should be told, and it only remains for me to express my lasting regret that the incident should have occurred." This letter, joined to certain lurid statements made by Stamper, had induced Spencer to accept Mrs. de la Verre's invitation. Little as he cared to dine in Bower's company, it was due to Helen that he should not refuse. He was entangled neck and heels in a net of his own contriving. For very shame's sake, he could not wriggle out, leaving Helen in the toils. Surely there never was a day more crammed with contrarieties. He witnessed his adversary's rebuff and put it down to its rightful cause. No sooner had he discovered Mrs. de la Verre's apparent motive in keeping the girl by her side than he was buttonholed by the Reverend Philip Hare. "You know I am not an ardent admirer of Bower," said the cleric, "but I must admit that it was very manly of him to make that outspoken statement about Miss Winton." "What statement?" asked Spencer. "Ah, I had forgotten. You were not present, of course." He made the other woman's hysterical outburst supremely ridiculous by saying, in effect, that he meant to marry Miss Winton. "He said that, eh?" "Yes." "He was quite emphatic. I rebuked Miss Jacks myself, and he thanked me. Everything was nicely cut and dried in my absence, it seems." "Well, the crowd evidently lost sight of the fact that I had carried off the prospective bride." "No." Miss Jacks called attention to it. "Guess her head is screwed on straight, Padre." She made a bad break in attacking Miss Winton, but when she set about Bower, she was running on a strong scent. "Sit tight, Mr. Hare. Don't take sides or whoop up the wrong spout, and you'll see heaps of fun before you're much older." Mightily incensed, the younger man turned away. The vicar produced his handkerchief and trumpeted into it loudly. "God bless my soul," he said, and repeated the pious wish, for he felt that it did him good. How does one whoop up the wrong spout, and what happens if one does, and how remarkably touchy everybody seems to be. Next time I apply to the CMS for an alpine station, I shall stipulate for a low altitude. I am sure this rarefied air is bad for the nerves. Nevertheless, Hare's startling communication was the one thing needed to clear away the doubts that beset Spencer at the dinner table. He had seen Mrs. de la Verre enter Helen's bedroom when he left the girl in charge of a gesticulating maid, but an act of womanly solicitude did not explain the friendship that sprang so suddenly into existence. Now he understood, or thought he understood, which is a man's way when he seeks to interpret a woman's mind. Mrs. de la Vere, like the rest, was dazzled by Bower's wealth. After ignoring Helen during the past fortnight, she was prepared to toady to her instantly in her new guise as the chosen bride of a millionaire. The belief added fuel to the fire already raging in his breast. There never was man more loyal to woman in his secret meditations than Spencer. But his gorge rose at the sight of Helen's winsome gratitude to one so unworthy of it. With him, now as ever, to think was to act. Watching his chance, he waylaid Helen when her vigilant chaperone was momentarily absorbed in a suggestion that private theatricals and the rehearsal of a minuet would relieve the general tedium while the snow held. "Spare me 5 minutes, Miss Winton," he said. "I want to tell you something." Mrs. de la Vere pirouetted round on him before the girl could answer. "Miss Winton is just going to bed," she informed him graciously. "You know how tired she is, Mr. Spencer. You must wait till the morning." "I don't feel like waiting, but I promise to cut down my remarks to 1 minute, by the clock." He answered Mrs. de la Vere, but looked at Helen. Her colour rose and fell almost with each beat of her heart. She saw the steadfast purpose in his eyes and shrank from the decision she would be called upon to make. Hardly realizing what form the words took, she gave faint utterance to the first lucid idea that presented itself. "I think I must really go to my room," she murmured. "You wouldn't like me to faint twice in one evening, Mr. Spencer?" It was an astonishing thing to say, the worst thing possible. It betrayed an exact knowledge of his purpose in seeking this interview. His eyes blazed with a quick light. It seemed that he was answered before he spoke. "Not 1 second. Go away, do," broke in Mrs. de la Vere, whisking Helen toward the elevator without further parley. But she shot a glance at Spencer over her shoulder that he could not fail to interpret as a silent message of encouragement. Forthwith he viewed her behaviour from a more favourable standpoint. "Guess the feminine make-up is more complex than I counted on," he communed, as he bent over a table to find a match, that being a commonplace sort of action calculated to disarm suspicion, lest others might be observing him and wondering why the women retired so promptly. "I like your American, my dear," said Mrs. de la Vere sympathetically, in the solitude of the corridor. Helen was silent. "If you want to cry, don't mind me," went on the kindly cynic. "I'm coming in with you. I'll light up while you weep, and then you must tell me all about it. That will do you a world of good." "There's nothing to tell," bleated Helen. "Oh, yes, there is. You silly child. Tomorrow you will have to choose between those 2 men. Which shall it be? I said before dinner that I couldn't help you to decide. Perhaps I was mistaken. Anyhow, I'll try." At midnight, the snowstorm ceased. The wind died away, and the still air deposited its vapour on hills and valley in a hoarfrost. The sun rose with a magnificent disregard for yesterday's riot. Spencer's room faced the southeast. When the valet drew his blind in the morning, the cold room was filled with a balmy warmth. A glance through the window, however, dispelled a germ of hope that Helen and he might start on the promised walk to Vicarsoprano. The snow lay deep in the pass and probably extended a mile or 2 down into the Vale of Bregaglia. The rapid thaw that would set in during the forenoon might clear the roads before sunset. Next day, walking would be practicable. Today it meant wading. He looked through the Orlegna Gorge and caught the silvery sheen of the Cima di Rosso's snow-capped summit. Hardly a rock was visible. The gale had clothed each crag with a white shroud. All day long the upper reaches of the glacier would be pelted by avalanches. It struck him that an early stroll to the highest point of the path beyond Cavlocchio might be rewarded with a distant view of several falls. In any case, it provided an excellent pretext for securing Helen's company, and he would have cheerfully suggested a trip in a balloon to attain the same object. The temperature of his bath-water induced doubts as to the imminence of the thaw. Indeed, the air was bitterly cold as yet. The snow lay closely on roads and meadowland. It had the texture of fine powder. Passing traffic left shallow, well-defined marks. A couple of stablemen swung their arms to restore circulation. The breath of horses and cattle showed in dense clouds. For once in his life, the colour of a tie and the style of his clothes became matters of serious import. At first, he was blind to the humour of it. He hesitated between the spruce tightness of a suit fashioned by a New York tailor and the more loosely designed garments he had purchased in London. Then he laughed and reddened. Flinging both aside, he chose the climber's garb worn the previous day and began to dress hurriedly. Therein he was well advised. Nothing could better become his athletic figure. He was that type of man who looks thinner when fully clothed. He had never spared himself when asking others to work hard, and he received his guerdon now in a frame of iron and sinews of pliant steel. Helen usually came down to breakfast at 8:30. She had the healthy British habit of beginning the day with a good meal, and Spencer indulged in the conceit that he might be favoured with a tete-a-tete-a-tete before they started for the projected walk. Neither Bower nor Mrs. de la Vere ever put in an appearance at that hour. Though Americans inclined to the continental manner of living, this true Westerner found himself a sudden convert to English methods. In a word, he was in love, and his lady could not err. To please her, he was prepared to abjure iced water, even to drink tea. But, as often happens, his cheery mood was destined to end in disappointment. He lingered a whole hour in the salle à manger, but Helen came not. Then he rose in a panic. What if she had breakfasted in her room and was already basking in the sunlit veranda, perhaps listening to Bower's eloquence? He rushed out so suddenly that his waiter was amazed. Really, these Americans were incomprehensible, weird as the English. The two races dwelt far apart, but they moved in the same erratic orbit. To the stolid German mind, they were human comets, whose comings and goings were not to be gauged by any reasonable standard. No, the veranda was empty, to him. Plenty of people greeted him, but there was no Helen. Ultimately, he reflected that their appointment was for 10 o'clock. He calmed down, and a pipe became obvious. He was enjoying that supremest delight of the smoker, the first soothing whiffs of the day's tobacco, when a servant brought him a note. The handwriting was strange to his eyes, but a premonition told him that it was Helen's. Somehow, he expected that she would write in a clear, strong, legible way. He was not mistaken. She sent a friendly little message that she was devoting the morning to work. The weather made it impossible to go to Vicasoprano, and in any event she did not feel equal to a long walk. Yesterday's events, she explained, took more out of me than I imagined. Well, she had been thinking of him, and that counted. He was staring at the snow-covered tennis courts and wondering how soon the valley would regain its summer aspect, when Stamper limped into sight round the corner of the hotel. He stood at the foot of the broad flight of steps, as though waiting for someone. Spencer was about to join him for a chat, when he recollected that Bower and the guide had an arrangement to meet in the morning. With the memory came a queer jumble of impressions. Stamper's story, told overnight, was a sad one, but the American was too fair-minded to affect a moral detestation of Bower, because of a piece of folly that wrecked a girl's life 16 years ago. If the sins of a man's youth were to shadow his whole life, then charity and regeneration must be cast out of the scheme of things. Moreover, Bower's version of the incident might put a new face on it. There was no knowing how he too had been tempted and suffered. That he raged against the resurrection of a bygone misdeed was shown by his mad impulse to kill Stamper on the glacier. That such a man, strong in the power of his wealth and social position, should even dream of blotting out the past by a crime, offered the clearest proof of the frenzy that possessed him as soon as he recognized Etta Stamper's father. Not one word of his personal belief crossed Spencer's lips during the talk with the guide. Rather did he impress on his angry and vengeful hearer that a forgotten scandal should be left in its tomb. He took this line, not that he posed as a moralist, but because he hated to acknowledge, even to himself, that he was helped in his wooing by Helen's horror of his rival's lapse from the standard every pure-minded woman sets up in her ideal lover. Ethically he might be wrong, in his conscience he was justified. He had suffered too grievously from every species of intrigue and calumny during his own career, not to be ultra-sensitive in regard to the use of such agents. Yet watching the bent and crippled old man waiting there in the snow, a sense of pity and mourning chilled his heart with ice-cold touch. If I were Stamper's son, if that dead girl were my sister, how would I settle with Bower? He asked, clenching his pipe firmly between his teeth. Well, I could only ask God to be merciful both to him and to me. Good gracious, Mr. Spencer, why that fierce gaze at our delightful valley, came the voice of Mrs. de la Vere. I am glad none of us can give you the address of the Swiss clerk of the weather, or you would surely slay him. He turned. Convention demanded a smile and a polite greeting, but Spencer was not conventional. You are a thought reader, Mrs. de la Vere, he said. One of my many attractions, you should have added. I find this limpid light too critical. Oh, what a horrid thing to tell any woman, especially in the early morning. I have a wretched habit of putting the second part of a sentence first. I really intended to say, but it is too late. It is rather like swallowing the sugar coating after the pill, but I'll try. Well then, this crystal atmosphere does not lend itself to the obvious. If we were in London, I should catalogue your bewitchments lest you imagined I was blind to them. That sounds nice, but it demands analysis, so I have failed doubly. I don't feel up to talking like a character in one of Henry James's novels. And you were much more amusing last night. Have you seen Miss Jacks this morning? No. That is, I don't think so. Do you know her? No. It would be a kind thing if someone told her that there are other places in Switzerland where she will command the general admiration she deserves. I am inclined to believe that there is a man in the hotel who can put that notion before her delicately. Spencer possessed the unchanging gravity of expression that the whole American race seems to have borrowed from the Red Indian. Mrs. de la Verre's eyes twinkled as she gazed at him. You didn't hear what was said last night, she murmured. Where Millicent Jacks is concerned, delicacy is absent from Mr. Bower's makeup. Is that good New York? It would be understood. This time he smiled. Mrs. de la Verre wished to be a friend to Helen. Whatsoever her motive, the wish was excellent. You are severe, she pouted. Of course I ought not to mimic you. Pray do. I had no idea I spoke so nicely. Thank you, but I am serious. I have espoused Miss Winton's cause, and there will be nothing but unhappiness for her while that other girl remains here. I hope you are mistaken, he said slowly, meeting her quizzing glance without flinching. That is precisely where a woman's point of view differs from a man's, she countered. In our lives we are swayed by things that men despise. We are conscious of sidelong looks and whisperings. We dread the finger of scorn. When you have a wife, Mr. Spencer, you will begin to realize the limitations of the feminine horizon. Are you asking me to take this demonstrative young lady in hand? I believe you would succeed. Spencer smiled again. He had not credited Mrs. de la Verre with such fine perceptiveness. If her words meant anything, they implied an alliance, offensive and defensive, for Helen's benefit and his own. Guess we'll leave it right there till I've had a few words with Miss Winton, he said, dropping suddenly into colloquial phrase. A heart-to-heart talk, in fact. She laughed pleasantly and opened her cigarette case. Tell you what, Mrs. de la Verre, he said, if ever you come to Colorado I shall hail you as a real cousin. Then a silence fell between them. Bower was walking out of the hotel. He passed close in front of the glass partition and might have seen them if his eyes were not as preoccupied as his mind. But he was looking at Stamper and frowning in deep thought. The guide heard his slow, heavy tread and turned. The two met. They exchanged no word, but went away together, the lame peasant hobbling along by the side of the tall, well-dressed plutocrat. How odd, said Mrs. de la Verre. How exceedingly odd.